we go. Start recording. Okay, so what we wanted to do today, and we'll go to about 9:30 today. It'll be a little lighter, but remember, today's assignment isn't a mini quiz, right? I kind of, just because we only had 2 days last week and we were just starting the car up, I didn't want to do a progress check. I do want to do a progress check today for our assignment. Now, you don't have to have a lot done for your progress check, right? Really, just as long as you maybe get like the wheel and one of your wheel wells started, just have what looks like you're starting to build the wheel and the wheel well, right? So remember, the way you do a progress check in Blender is, one, you just submit a screenshot to your assignment. So you just go to your assignment, you submit, you upload a screenshot. Almost all of you guys are familiar with this at this point. But remember, the way you take a screenshot in Blender is you go to Window, and you'll see that there's actually an area in Window, the Window menu in Blender, called Save Screenshot, right? And what you can do is you can just save this as, progress for today, screenshot PNG, and just save it, right? That's it. If you wanted to save it as a different format, there's a little kind of triangle there, like that little V. If I just minimize it, see how I kind of minimize down, there's a little kind of V right there. You click on it, and you see you can actually pick different formats, right? So you can actually, of course, save out different file formats. PNG works pretty well, though, so usually the default's fine. But that's all you have to do to save a screenshot, right? Is you just go Window, Save Screenshot. And what it does, it takes a screenshot of your view here, right? And saves it as a PNG with a name you give it, and save it somewhere where you know you're going to find it, right? So actually save it to desktop or someplace you know you can grab it. And then, of course, you'll actually submit it to the assignment itself. So that's how you take the screenshot. That's what you submit. What I'm really looking for today, and remember, you have till the end of the day to do these. These are not due during class. They're due at the end of the day. So if you need a little bit more time to work on it, maybe a smidge at home for homework or something like that, that's okay. But basically, we're looking to kind of maybe get the basic wheel started and get some of that wheel well started off. It doesn't have to have both yet, but just kind of get that starting point there. Remember, this progress checks, and I know almost all of you guys know this. This is more for like Dante and Paulina, because you're new to what we do is usually we'll alternate every other day. Every other day is a mini quiz, which I'll review for that day. And it's just a great way to kind of constantly reinforce, remind you guys about some basic shortcut keys and things like that. But the progress checks are screenshots of basically just your what you're working on. And they don't have to be exactly where I want them to be at, right? Because I'll tell you, like, hey, be here. That's more an ideal goal. As long as you're constantly doing new stuff and progressing, I will generally give you all the points for it, right? So it's kind of one of those things where it's really just a way for me to give you guys some easy points for continually working and to keep you guys basically on task, right? It's a way for me to say, hey, guess what? I know you're working on this. I know you're making progress, right? So these progress checks are pretty easy. As long as you're showing me that you're working on it, even if you're not quite where like I describe it to be in there, that's okay, right? It's kind of one of those things that's fine. It's just a way to keep you guys on task and make sure you're progressing. And it also allows me to look at it and give you some quick feedback. But they're really mostly participation, right? It's basically if you're doing it, if you're making progress, you're continually adding new stuff to each progress check, you're fine. You're going to get your points. Obviously, this car is due at the end of the term, so we have the whole semester to work on this, right? So it's kind of one of those things where the progress checks themselves, you don't have to sweat that much. You should do them every time I want them turned in. But, if like maybe one of the days you struggle a little bit and you didn't get quite as far, but you still made progress, you're fine, right? It's just a way to make sure you're not saving this all till the end, right? And a way for me to be able to give you guys feedback as we go along. So just remember that. All right, guys. So remember, the biggest thing we're doing for this, besides kind of just reminding us how to do save screenshots, right? Windows screenshot. Remember, you want to be in modeling viewport. We do have our industry compatible turned on, right? So edit, preferences. We've got that key map industry compatible turned on. And that gives you the Maya quick keys for navigation and all that stuff. So alt left, alt middle, alt right, right? And really what we were doing before was like we just created a cylinder on its side. We hit 3, it goes to face mode. We just did some insets and some extrudes to create this. And then we could actually just select some faces here. And remember, we duplicated them, right? There is that duplicate that copies those polygons off into their own object. Or not even their own object, but their own polygons. And then, of course, you can separate them, particularly if you're right down here, separate. And then we were just using extrude and bridge to kind of connect up the actual wheel wells. But what's great about starting it from a wheel, right, is one, you already have the basic wheel started. We're going to worry about the rim later on, not yet. It's a little bit tricky, not too super tricky. Blender's actually quite good at it, but we'll get the car body mostly built first, and then at some point, just to vary things up, we'll start to work on the rim. So we eventually are going to make a rim, right? It's a cool thing to show you guys how to do. But I really just wanted to show you guys how you can copy off of stuff into their own objects. And what's great is you have this nice, perfect kind of wheel well arch, right? We kind of created those, and then we scaled them up, and then we moved them up a little bit. But it gives you this nice arch that matches the wheel really well, right? So remember, your objects, object mode is 4, right? So 4 for object mode. It is this pull down right here, though, right? Object mode. And you just click on these different objects. Now, you'll notice that the objects are right up here, right? Remember, this is the Blender's version of Outliner, right? And it is called Outliner. Remember, you can name these, right? So you can select on your objects in here, but you can also double click on them just like you would in Maya. And you can name them. So I can double click on that. We'll call this car body. You guys don't have to, but it's good to organize stuff. And this will be wheels, so double click on that. Wheel, or wheels, there we go. And you could always kind of move these around as well. If you wanted to, you could even kind of put your camera and your light into their own collections. I won't worry about that today, but there's your objects. But remember, you can just double click and you can name those. But the outliner is just a list of your objects as kind of an actual list. But of course, you can click on them in viewport as well, just left click. Now remember, 2 is edge mode, right? So 1 is vertex mode, that'll give you your points in space. 2 is edges, and that's the line between points. And of course, 3 is face or polygon mode, and that's your actual polygon shape. Remember, there are 3 major shapes: triangles, quads, and n-gons. And remember, an n-gon is any polygon that's got more than 4 vertices, more than 4, right? So 5 or more. N-gons are the spastic on-fire toddler of polygon world, right? Obviously, you know, sometimes you kind of need to babysit them, right? So like we saw in our room, n-gons were okay, right? We could occasionally use n-gons here and there on walls, really flat planar surfaces that we're gonna be subdivided. We're gonna put pebbles on them. But generally, you really want to primarily work with quads, right? Quads, just like things like your loop cut tool, work really well with them, really predictably. So quads just kind of end up being the kind of Goldilocks polygon, right? A quad is a polygon with 4 vertices. I know most of you guys know this, but just trying to remind you guys and remind my 2 new students. So that's why we're really trying to keep these as 4-sided polygons, right? Polygons that have 4 vertices, quads. That's the Goldilocks polygon. We really like those the best. We try to use those primarily for most stuff, particularly on a car, character, or creature. You really want those to just about all be quads, right? So just quick reminders about that. But we're not building this quad with car with polygons. We're actually using the border edges, right? Now, an edge like this, it's not usually a good idea to extrude, right? If I was to just say extrude this, Control E for extrude, you'll notice it does that. You notice how that looks? The shading looks weird. You all of a sudden have basically 3 polygons sharing a single edge. The subdivisional surface does weird stuff. If you were to try to go and do like a loop cut here, you see how it's going to stop there. If you try to bevel in that area, it's not going to work. That's what we call non-manifold geometry. And I've kind of briefly mentioned this earlier, but we haven't talked about it as much yet. Usually when you're extruding just lots of polygons, you don't have to worry about it too much. Non-manifold geometry is horrible. One, you saw it looked weird, and it shades weird. A lot of your tools won't work with it. Non-manifold geometry is generally bad geometry. So if you're going to extrude edges, just like in Maya, right? Some of you guys remember Maya from last term. Some of you guys have just used Blender. You don't want non-manifold geometry, right? Any polygon or any edge that's got 3 polygons coming into it is non-manifold. And that causes all kinds of problems. So non-manifold geometry, bad, right? Bad, not cool. So we don't want to extrude this kind of edge, right? Because that's not a border edge, right? Border edges are edges that only have 1 polygon connected to them, right? This edge has at least 2 polygons connected to it. So if we extrude it, it's going to create an edge that's got 3 polygons, non-manifold. So basically the only things you should ever extrude are polygons, right, and border edges, right? But a border edge is any edge that's only got one face. Because when you extrude that, it's going to create an edge that's got two faces, normal, right? So just keep that in mind, right? So just kind of little reminders about that. Like, so today's I think is going to be a little more conceptual heavy. We'll do some modeling some more, of course, but just want to remind you guys about some of those concepts. Now, one of the things I want to talk to you guys about today, too, as well, is the clipping, right? Now, you'll notice we have our modifiers over here. And I know we've talked about these plenty, but you know what? It's one of those things we don't use modifiers all the time. We kind of apply them and then forget them, right? Once you've built a ton of models, because, guys, I'm building several models in any given semester, way more than you guys probably are by a good margin. I just don't always show them or bring them in. Sometimes I get, like, 80% through them, and then I'm like, yeah, you know, I don't like that design anymore. I'm going to build something else, right? Because I'm just, like, 3D sketching. So, you know, I've got a ton of practice in this stuff, but you guys aren't applying modifiers all the time yet, right? You haven't built tons of models yet. So it never hurts to remind you guys about modifiers, right? Now, you notice I have this up. Remember, that's an add-on. You guys don't have to really worry about that right now. We'll talk about it a little more later on. It is an add-on that comes with Blender, though. And for those of you guys that already had it set up, you're good to go, right? But remember, this blue wrench is your modifiers, right? And you'll see there's a little pull down here called Add Modifier. That's where our mirror tool's at, and that's where our subdivision surface is at, right? So we add the mirror first. And what mirror does is it really gives us that symmetry, right? Gives us that symmetry so that we have the model here, and then we have the other half there. And you'll notice we can select and work, and it's basically our symmetry function. Now, one of the cool things about this symmetry function, unlike Maya's symmetry, is it pretty much never breaks. It's really, really cool. Some of you guys remember Maya, symmetry would occasionally turn itself off, or you get some shape drift, and it was kind of annoying, right? The only other way to avoid that was to use a similar mirror option in Maya, but its mirror features compared to Blender's, not nearly as cool, right? Blender's mirror feature, once you know how it works, is great. So remember, you could pick the axis, and you'll notice that you can actually mirror it along all the axes, right? Which is super cool. In this case, I just wanted the z-axis. It normally would be the x, because that's the red, but because I rotated these wheels, that did kind of throw off which axis. But that's just one of those cases you just click on the axis until you get the right one. Remember, though, you can have multiple. In this case, we only wanted one. Also, remember these little triangles in front, particularly if you're working with Blender 2.9 or above. This guy right here is what shows it on both sides. So if I turn it off, actually, it is showing on both sides still anyways, but normally it shows through your full process for the modeling, right? It just basically shows everything on the cage also, right? So usually you like to have those guys on. Same thing with the subdivisional surface. If that's off, you see how you can kind of see the control cage off the surface, which is annoying. So I usually turn those triangles on just to make sure that you see everything directly on the surface the way you're expecting to see it. And the subdivision surface, of course, is rounding it off, right? Now, we are eventually going to subdivide this guy. And of course, if you go to here, you can turn statistics on so you can kind of get an idea of your polygon count. Although it's counting kind of the low res at the moment. But see, if you go to object mode, you can kind of get a better idea of the full count, right? Now, one of the things that's also great, and remember we've talked about this several times, clipping, right? Clipping is super cool. I'm going to show you guys what it does. And we've done it on many of our other models, right? So this is just a great reminder. Also, like I said, I'm kind of reteaching some basic stuff again for really Pauline and Dante, right, that are new to Blender. So occasionally we have this. Many of you guys, like Giovanni, remembers when you guys popped in halfway through last year. It was kind of like, wow, Mike's throwing us into a complicated spaceship for our first model. Thanks, Mike. Right? So it's kind of one of those things where because of the way sometimes that works, you guys just end up dropping in on a model. You're like, well, okay, I'm making a car. Right? So I do kind of tend to halfway through here, the first couple of lectures, I'll reteach some basic stuff because one, it never hurts for you guys to see these things again. Two, trying to help my couple of new students that have not used Blender yet. So what's really, really cool about clipping is if I'm going to leave it off for the moment just to show what it does without it. But in this case, I want to maybe make a sweeping kind of front part of our fender for this car, right? Because you see I kind of bridge these guys together, right? You just select the edges you want to bridge, right click, and you see you could, when you have multiple selected, you should have a bridge option. Right now it's not available because I don't have enough selected, but there would be a bridge when you right click, right? Here though, I just want to make more fender. So what's great about this method is it kind of lets you build the panels to follow the structure you want, right? The actual flow of the shape of the contour of the surface. But it allows you to do it in a fast, easy way. I love it. There are a couple of other methods for doing it, but this is one of the fastest, easiest ways while still getting exactly what you want. So we can extrude this, right? So that's the great thing is it's just the extrude tool, which, guys, is one of the best modeling tools ever. You guys are already that, particularly with me the whole first part of the year. You know how powerful Extrude is. And Dante, you were with me last year, so you know Extrude's powerful, right? So we use lots of other tools, but Extrude, if you're ever in any doubt, guys, Extrude stuff, right? If you're ever in any doubt. So I'm just going to hit Control-E for Extrude. And the nice thing is that's the same quick key as Maya's Extrude, right? That's what industry compatible offers up. There's a lot of the default Maya interactions and quick keys. Now remember, when you go to Extrude, you can grab the yellow handle if you want to. Or the white, because that'll do kind of basically along the view, but also middle mouse button. If you just hold down middle mouse button, that extrudes along view for you. So you see how you can extrude this out? So we can extrude that, start to move it out a little bit. I can do a middle mouse button, do another extrusion, so you see I can do another extrusion right off the bat. At this point, if I want, I can hit E for rotate, right? Remember, E is your rotate. Although remember, if you're in modeling, you'll see them right here. Move, rotate, scale, but they are the same Maya quick keys, right? The quick keys that most of you guys have been, I've been drilling into you guys through mini quizzes for the whole year so far, right? So remember, E is rotate. Now remember, you have these other handles. So if you want to rotate just along the Y, or just along the X, or just along the Z, you can. But this outer one is your view rotate. And what's really cool is by default, your middle mouse button rotates as well along the view. So your middle mouse button is automatically your view rotate. Once I started really understanding about a blender, I just love it. Of course, W for move. And the same thing applies here, right? You can grab these handles or even those squares to move along too. But middle mouse button automatically does your view move, which is that center one. And I can do another extrusion. Maybe rotate around here. E for rotate, middle mouse button. Control E for another extrusion, middle mouse button just to do a view extrude. E for rotate. And you see I'm using the middle mouse button a lot for this, right? Because we can kind of pull this fender out. Now if I wanted to, of course, I could go to 3 for face mode. Hit W. Middle mouse button, move that down. So you see how you can kind of still adjust the shape exactly the way you want to. Just by switching your different selection types. Remember 3 for face mode. 2 for edge mode. Now I'm going to extrude one more time. So we'll extrude, middle mouse button. And I'll switch to W for move. Now you notice if I have clipping off, you see how these just intersect and go past each other into the other side, right? So without clipping turned on, that's the problem you're going to run into, right? So without clipping turned on, that's the problem you're going to run into. So if I turn clipping on, you'll notice as I start to move those in there, we'll start to clip together. You might want to go to those vertices there and just kind of make sure to clip those properly. Oh, what are you doing to me? I shouldn't need to turn the merge distance up more, but let's turn it up just a little bit more. What are you doing? Try face mode here. There we go. So there we go. And then you'll see when clipping's on, they stick together. So clipping is really, really cool because what it does is it makes it so those automatically weld together and stay together. So it works much more like Maya's symmetry when you turn it on, but it never breaks. It never falls off symmetry. You don't have to worry about turning it on because this is an actual mirror modifier that's always on. So once I actually figured out what clipping did at the end of last term, I was like, oh, that just gave me something really cool. You can avoid the double head syndrome with characters, creatures. Clipping is super awesome. So remember, this mirror modifier in Blender's pretty great. It's pretty great. So there we go. And then, of course, and you see how I can move this vertex up? And it just, I can even try to pull it this way, and it's not. So clipping is super powerful for letting your symmetry to fully function the way you want to. All right. Maybe do a little view rotate on that one. And you see how I've kind of created the start of this little kind of front fender section. If I wanted to, I could even start to create the hood here a little bit, right? Control E for extrude. And you'll notice that that's not pulling that seam off the center there because clipping's on, right? That's what clipping does for you. Control E for extrusion again. And you see how you can start to build the car paneling, right? But you can build it to follow whatever shape or contour you want. And what we're going to do is we're going to slowly build and connect it all together so we can get all kinds of neat, interesting edge loop flows that will blend into each other pretty easily. And we can do it all really quickly with full real-time feedback of polygonal modeling, right? Because the only two other real ways to build a car, or three ways, is through splines, which Blender's overall spline for bi-rails just isn't that cool. And bi-rail modeling a car is really hard and time-consuming, even though it's a correct way also. You can always sculpt a mesh and then retopo it. That takes a lot of time. And then some people I've seen, they'll just drop a cube in and just use their manual knife tool to cut this shapes in. All of these ways, though, you're trying to get the edge loops to follow the contours of the paneling of the vehicle. And in my personal experience, having tried all these different ways and using all these different techniques, that one of the easiest, fastest ways is this method. So I'm a big proponent of this. A lot of people actually model their cars this way. I did not create this method. I saw other people doing it in 3D Studio Max and Maya years and years ago, and then tried it myself, and I was like, wow, that's made car modeling so much easier. And it's a great alternative technique. So extrude's great, but you see we're just really extruding border edges. All right, so I think that's going to be a great place to stop for today's video lecture. We didn't actually model that much of our car today because I want to talk to you guys a little about things like clipping and renaming and screenshots and just kind of exploring this idea more of what this method allows us, right? So I think at this point I will stop the recording.